Okay, 7th grade. For today's EdPuzzle activator, you're going to have about 3 minutes to work through each of these questions. Make sure that you flip the question and that you answer in complete sentences. 3 minutes is on the timer, and begin. Okay, so for each of these, again, I was looking for a complete sentence and that you actually flipped the question. You did not need to cite evidence, but you should have made sure you answered the question. Number one said, what is one way that Napoleon has abused his power on the farm so far? So you could have thought back to how Napoleon sent those dogs, those wild dogs, on Snowball when he disagreed with him and he kicked him off the farm. You could have talked about how Napoleon drank all the rest of the cow's milk and lied about it. Any other examples from events from the plot that showed how Napoleon's been abusing his power? Remember that Napoleon represents Joseph Stalin. Speaking of Stalin, number two said, think about what we've learned about Joseph Stalin. How did he abuse his power when he led the Bolsheviks to overthrow the Tsar and take over Russia? So you could have talked about how he started using violence to try to frighten or intimidate people who opposed him. You could have talked about how he did not make life better for the peasants. Remember, the peasants are like the animals on Animal Farm. Any of those details about the life of Joseph Stalin, how he was a harsh and cruel leader, how he killed many Russians who disagreed with him, any of those details would have been acceptable in a complete sentence for number two. And number three, make a prediction based on how Napoleon had been abusing his power. What do you think the other animals are going to do? This is just simply based on what you think is going to happen in the text. For my prediction, I would have said that based on the events in the Russian Revolution, I bet the animals, like the peasants, are probably going to rise up in revolution to overthrow Stalin, even though they overthrew the Tsar first. based on what's happened in the Russian Revolution. So you could have had any of those answers. Really, number 3 was up to you. Now let's look down at our objective. I can analyze, circle that keyword analyze, which means we're going to break down how the author of Animal Farm develops, which means like how he builds a theme throughout the text. So we've already been talking about the theme of power. How do people use power? Do people use power in good ways? But how do they also abuse their power? That's the message that the author of Animal Farm is trying to convey or show us. So we're going to be, again, looking for those key details in the text that show that. Next, let's go ahead and fill in our guided notes. Theme is the life lesson or moral that the author is trying to teach. An author can develop a theme through a character's actions that cause conflict or a problem, or how a character makes another character feel. So any one of those would be acceptable. Take 60 seconds to make sure that your guided notes match mine. Quickly check over. Okay, now that you've looked over the notes here, we know that we're going to be focused on theme. We know we're going to be focused on looking at not just what is the theme of our story, but also how does the author develop theme? What actions are our characters doing, or how are they affecting other characters? That's what we're going to be looking at today. Go ahead and flip to the next page to your text-dependent questions. I'm going to start including some criteria for success, because I'm really looking, when I go to grade your classwork, for 3 key things. 1, did you flip the question? That's a very important skill as you head into 8th grade and into high school. Are you able to flip that question and make sure you're actually answering the question in a complete sentence for each of these? And then you need to make sure that you're underlining and annotating on your copy of the text. That's why I take time to make copies of the text, so that you can better understand and you can make sure that you have your evidence underlined. This piece right here can also help you when you get to your classwork. If you already have good pieces of evidence underlined, though oftentimes these TDQs will help clue you into what's important. Go ahead at this time, take out your copy of the text, and again, like I said before, I always read question number 1 first. So number 1 says, what did Squealer announce one Monday morning? Flip the question, annotate. Of course, I'm going to start you on number 1, but y'all know the drill on how to get through the rest of them. Squealer. Remember, Squealer is one of the pigs, one of the leaders like Napoleon and like Snowball was. Squealer announces one Monday morning that. So I've met that first criteria for success. I flipped the question. Now, let's do a quick review discussion on what we remember from Animal Farm before we left. We remember that Snowball and Napoleon were disagreeing over whether or not they should build this windmill. Napoleon was arguing that they needed it. Snowball was arguing that they did not. And they were sort of going back and forth over the arguments over this windmill. Now, we remember that Napoleon used his power. He sent those dogs on Snowball, and Snowball ran away. He disappeared over to another farm, and that we never saw him again after that. Also, we remember that when I think back to the chapter 6, I remember that a lot of the animals were starting to fear Napoleon. They were starting to be afraid of his power. And even though some of them disagreed with him, they continued to obey him, and they continued to respect his power out of fear. That's what I remember. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start a read aloud of our text. Again, of course, if you need to pause the reading at any time so that you can actually go back through and get your TDQs, we'll do the first one together, and then the others you're going to do on your own. So again, I'm looking for that answer to number 1 as I start reading, and then I'm going to be looking through for my answers to the next ones. Again, any annotations that I make on the text of any vocabulary, please make sure that you get those words circled as well. All right, so we're going to start right here. One Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens, who had just come in to lay again, must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted, through Whimper, who's one of the animals on the farm, a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of these would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. So already I've got my answer to number 1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look, and it said, Squealer announces one Monday morning that. I'm going to zoom out so that everyone can see my answer here. So what did Squealer announce? Well, I'm going to go ahead and underline. Squealer announced that the hens, what's the key part, must surrender their eggs. So I'm going to underline that. I'm going to put TDQ number 1, and I'm going to go ahead and quickly come up here. Squealer announces one Monday morning that the hens, it says they must surrender, and if you surrender something, that means you give up. So he announces one Monday morning that the hens must give up their eggs. These should be quick. Double check. I flipped the question. Yes. I answered in a complete sentence. Yes. And I underlined and annotated in the text. Yes. Check, check, check. Criteria for success. We're good. Next question, I'm looking to see how did the hens respond. From this point forward, make sure that you're looking in your own text. And then if you need to pause at any point, that's totally fine. When the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that it would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sitting. Clutches just means like their eggs. And they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion, circle expulsion, we know if you get expelled from school, you get the expulsion, kicked out. So for the first time since the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. That's important there. Led by 3 young black Minorca pullets. That's a type of hen or a type of bird. The hens made a determined effort to thwart, circle thwart. They made a determined effort to stop Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters, which is in the top of the barn, and lay their eggs, which smashed to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens rations, circle rations. Rations just means like their food, the food that they're going to be given. So he ordered that their rations be stopped and decreed or said that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. Again, notice how Napoleon's using the dogs again. For 5 days, the hens held out. Then they capitulated, which means like they gave in. They were trying to hold out. They didn't want to be giving up their eggs to Napoleon, but they gave in and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was given out that they had died of coccidiosis. Don't worry about the pronunciation. All you need to know is this is a disease, a type of disease. Whimper, one of the animals on the farm, heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered. A grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. All this while, no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchfield. Napoleon was, by this time, on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It happened that there was in the yard a pile of timber, circle timber. Timber is like a type of wood, which had been stacked there 10 years earlier when a beech spinney was cleared, which is a type of tree. It was well seasoned, and Whymper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed on the point of coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball was declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, one of the other farms, while, when he inclined towards Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. We're going to read to the bottom of this page, and then I'm going to release you to finish your TDQs. Suddenly, early in the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. At this time, I'm going to ask you to continue on to page 78 to make sure that you have your answers to your TDQ questions, numbers 2 through 7. In order to get number 6 and 7, you need to continue reading at the bottom of page 77 to the top of page 78. So again, if you do not have all of your TDQs answered at this time, go ahead and pause our EdPuzzle lesson and make sure that you are looking over each of your questions. If you are finished with your TDQs fully, completely, you've checked your criteria for success, then you're ready to move on to task number 1. Now, remember, in our objective today, we said our goal was to be able to analyze how the author develops the theme. An author can develop a theme through a character's actions or through what happens in the plot of the story. A quick reminder, our theme that we've been talking about so far is ruthless and harsh leaders can control others by how they use their power. Circle that word power, circle ruthless, and circle harsh. There are 3 things that I'm going to be looking for as you complete these tasks, analyzing how leaders can control others by using their power. 1, I'm going to be looking for, did you answer the question? 2, did you cite 2 pieces of evidence? By the 7th grade, you're expected in the state of Tennessee to be able to cite multiple pieces of evidence. That's going to help prepare you for 8th grade to support analysis of the text. Finally, I'm going to be looking for you to explain your evidence. Each of these boxes should be fully filled by the end of class as we start to analyze. So I'm going to walk you through modeling, thinking about the first one and finding your first piece of evidence. I'm then going to release you to finish each one of these. So first, we're going to flip each one of these questions to make sure that we're actually answering it. Number 1 says, how do Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme? So I'm going to flip it first. Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme because. If you say, Mr. Wilson, I don't remember, what is the actual theme here? You need to be looking back up here at the top of your graphic organizer. Let's get the rest of our sentence stems real quick. In the text, it states, first piece of evidence. Second piece, in the text, it also states. And then finally, bring your sentence stem down. These pieces of evidence develop the theme because. So each one of these graphic organizers should have at least 4 complete sentences to it. All right, so if I'm the student, I'm going to come back here. I'm going to get you started on number 1 and number 2, and then I'm going to release you to finish up this one and then the next task as well. So again, the question is, how do Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme? And I said Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme because. So if I think about, first, the question's asking about his actions. So I need to be thinking about what does he actually do that illustrates the theme? What is the theme? What does he do that illustrates how harsh leaders can control others by how they use their power? Well, if I start thinking about back into this chapter, and I start thinking about what Napoleon's actions actually were, I see that he started to treat the hens unfairly. I saw that he used his power to take extra food that without their permission. And then I also saw that he used his power by actually killing the hens. So this is the first time that we see a death on Animal Farm that's not because of the humans against the animals, but it's because of the animals against the animals. So I want to say Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme because he uses, what were the 2 examples I gave? He uses his power to take advantage of the hens, eggs, and so my first reason, his actions in this chapter illustrate the theme because he uses his power to take advantage of the hens' eggs, and he uses violence to stop opposition. Opposition is just another word for if you opposed or you were against. So notice how in my answer, A, I answered the question. I didn't just say Napoleon's actions in this chapter illustrate the theme. I said illustrate the theme because, 1, he uses his power to take advantage of the hen's eggs. That's going to be my first piece of evidence. And he uses violence to stop opposition, or to keep people from opposing him or going against him. That's going to be my second piece of evidence. So as I go back into the text, I need to first find a piece of evidence that shows reason number 1. I then need to find a second piece of evidence that shows reason number 2. Once I've found those 2, I'm then going to come down here and I'm going to explain. These pieces of evidence develop the theme because. In this 4th sentence, you need to be explaining, restating, and summarizing what happened. So you should be explaining what these pieces of evidence develop a theme because it shows, or because Napoleon's actions. You should be mentioning what happened in the text, and you should be mentioning, connecting it back to the theme up here. So at this time, I have done enough talking. I'm going to release you now to take the next 6 minutes to work through finding your 2 pieces of evidence and explaining. So we're going to do 5 minutes on the timer. And begin. Go find your evidence and explain. Okay, so I know the timer didn't go all the way down, so if you need to pause your video and Edpuzzle lesson at this time to finish task 1, I wanted to give quick instructions for those who are moving on to task 2. Task 2, you're going to do the exact same thing that we did for task 1. We're still analyzing how the author develops this theme of ruthless and harsh leaders can control others by how they use their power, but the question has changed, so take a look. Number 1 says, how does what Napoleon says about, there's a mistake here. It says, how does what Napoleon says about Squealer, cross that out. That should say, how does what Napoleon says about Snowball? How does what Napoleon says about Snowball illustrate the theme above? Now remember back in the text when you're answering your TDQs, anytime there were things that went wrong on the farm or things that seemed out of place, Napoleon would blame Snowball, who is no longer there. So when you go to flip your question and you find your 2 pieces of evidence, you need to be thinking about, how does Napoleon use Snowball to show this theme above? How does what he says about Snowball, by blaming him, by putting all the faults on him, how does that reflect this theme up here? Flip the question, cite 2 pieces of evidence from the end of chapter 7, and explain, just like we did before. At this point, I'm going to put 5 more minutes on the timer. Again, if you need to pause to finish up task 1, or if you're ready to move on to task 2, you're ready, and 5 minutes is on the timer. Begin. Okay, at this time, 7th grade, if you are ready to move into your exit ticket, go ahead and finish up your packet.